God's chosen on, your season of lack just ended. Now step into overflow. The chosen one, you didn't find this story, heaven delivered it to your spirit. This is not motivation. This is a mandate. Your exodus from lack has already begun. You may not feel it yet, but the moment your tears fell in silence, the moment you whispered, God, I can't live like this anymore, the floodgates started to move. You're not being tested anymore. You're being released. Not into hustle, not into grind, but into overflow. This is the moment your past can no longer follow you. This is the line in the sand between survival and sacred abundance. And if you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven, with your name on it, the threshold of transformation. I didn't know the exact moment it shifted. There was no lightning bolt, no booming voice from the sky, just a quiet ache in my spirit, and a whisper that felt like wind. You were never meant to live this small. I was standing in the kitchen of a home that never felt like mine. Bare walls, cold coffee, and a stack of bills that felt more like tombstones than paper. For years I had been surviving on faith fumes, chasing just enough, accepting almost, and convincing myself that peace was a luxury for other people. But heaven had been watching. Every tear I cried behind closed doors. Every moment I smiled for others while bleeding inside. Every time I tithed with trembling hands, not knowing how I'd eat next week. God saw it all, and He wasn't ignoring me. He was preparing me, because what I thought was delay was actually divine choreography. And now, without warning, yet right on time, everything is beginning to align. Not because I earned it, but because I endured it. The old chapter, the one where I shrank to fit, where I hustled for crumbs, is closed. I stand now at the threshold of transformation, not stepping into fantasy, but into my birthright. Because if lack was the teacher, then overflow is the reward. And the only question now is, will I believe I'm worthy of the very thing I prayed for? Part 1. The Wilderness Economy. A modest kitchen in rural Georgia. Early morning light leaks through a cracked window. Early morning light, save for the monastery sulfur, snow and light. Stay calm. Behind your eyelids will be the faces of man. And man are not a flight or fear. I used to think poverty was just numbers. A paycheck too short, a grocery list that always ended with maybe next time. But over time, I learned that lack has a voice, a scent, a presence. It creeps into your bones like winter. You stop dreaming big. You stop asking God for more. You shrink just to survive. That morning I sat in my kitchen in rural Georgia, wrapped in a frayed robe I'd had since college. The coffee was bitter. So was the memory that the electricity had nearly been shot off again. I rubbed my temples, already exhausted, and the sun hadn't even kissed the roof yet. I stared at the wall and remembered something my mother once whispered while folding laundry. Don't let the world make you forget what God promised you in the dark. She had lived through more storms than I could count, and yet there was always this knowing in her eyes. She called it faith. I, by now, had started calling it fiction. The spirit of lack doesn't shout. It whispers. Don't ask for too much. This is your portion. And for years I agreed with it. I made peace with scarcity. I dressed it up with humility. I called it being realistic. But deep in my gut, deeper than the shame, deeper than the fatigue, there was this quiet rebellion, something sacred and untamed. Something that remembered Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more. But immeasurably more didn't match the bills in front of me. It didn't reflect the eviction notice from last year. It didn't pay for the nights I fell asleep hungry. So I prayed half praise. Not because I lacked belief in God, but because I no longer believed He'd do it for me. And then it happened. No lightning, no fire from heaven, just a shift. I felt it the way you feel the seasons change, subtle but irreversible. The coffee in my cup stayed bitter, but my spirit did not. I couldn't explain it, but I stood up differently that morning. There was a line drawn in the spirit. I was done being polite with poverty, done worshipping with shackles, done settling for enough when heaven whispered, "Overflow." Because lack wasn't just attacking my wallet, it was attacking my worship. And that was where the line got drawn. You were not made to survive on crumbs. I walked out the front door with nothing new. No windfall, no miracle check. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't waiting to be free. I was deciding to be free. And heaven? It took notice. I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. Part 2. The Whisper Before the Wave. Midnight. A quiet, empty church parking lot in South Carolina. Rain taps gently on the windshield. The protagonist sits in her car, engine off, hands gripped around the steering wheel. It was just past midnight, and I didn't want to go home. Not because I had somewhere else to be, but because I didn't want to hear the silence in my apartment. The kind of silence that echoed more than noise ever could. I pulled into the church parking lot. Not for service, not for answers, just for stillness. Because some part of me hoped God still remembered where I was. The rain began to fall, light, rhythmic, almost sacred. I didn't cry, I didn't speak, I just sat. The dashboard clock glowed like a quiet reminder of how long I'd been waiting. For the breakthrough, for the promotion, for the prayer that would finally make sense. But nothing had come, except more waiting. That's when my phone buzzed. A voicemail. It was from a childhood friend, one I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't press play, not yet, because something holier was happening. In the silence, I felt it. Not a wind, not a voice, but a whisper. It moved through me, not with sound, but with knowing. A gentle yet unmistakable presence. Like the Spirit had been sitting beside me the whole time, waiting for me to stop long enough to hear him breathe. And he whispered something I didn't expect. You're not late. You're early for what I'm preparing behind the curtain. Tears didn't fall. They flowed, because I realized I had spent so much time asking God to speak louder, when what I really needed was to get quieter. Peace replaces panic. Stillness becomes the strategy. I didn't listen to the voicemail that night. I sat there until the rain slowed, until my heartbeat no longer raced with fear, until the Spirit's whisper became my anchor. And in that moment, I knew God wasn't ignoring me. He was incubating me. Because sometimes the quiet season isn't punishment, it's preparation. Not for a step, but for a wave. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. From that night forward, I stopped begging for loud signs and started leaning in to holy stillness. Because God doesn't always shout to be heard. Sometimes, he just waits for you to be still enough to feel him. Part 3. The Breaking of the Breadwinner. A stark corporate office in downtown Atlanta. Fluorescent lights. Grey carpet. The protagonist sits across from an HR manager with cold eyes and a well-rehearsed smile. A severance envelope sits untouched on the desk. Thank you for your service to the company. That's what she said. Her lips moved, but her eyes said, "You're replaceable." The envelope sat on the table between us like a tombstone over a chapter I didn't ask to bury. It wasn't just a job. It was my proof that I was still useful, that I still mattered, that I could still hold it all together. And now, it was gone. I walked out of that building with a cardboard box, a fake smile, and a heart that was silently screaming. What now, God? That night, I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by scattered resumes and unopened bills. And something broke, but it wasn't my spirit. It was my illusion. The illusion that if I worked hard enough, prayed long enough, played nice enough, I could secure peace for myself. I had made a false covenant with hustle. believing it was the only way to stay above water. But hustle had become my Egypt. And this breakdown was my Red Sea moment. This isn't failure, it's freedom disguised as a setback. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, if this is what obedience buys me, I don't know how to keep walking. And that's when I heard it again, not with my ears, but in my spirit. Cast your net one more time. It didn't make sense. There was no sea, no boat, no fish, only debt and disappointment. But I remembered Luke 5. Peter, exhausted, empty nets, empty hope, and still he obeyed. So I whispered, trembling, okay, God, one more time, one more net. But when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. That night, I didn't land a job. I didn't get a miracle email, but I did reclaim something far greater, my obedience. And in the kingdom of God, obedience is never unemployed. Heaven doesn't pay in direct deposit. It pays in divine timing. So I sat still, weary, but willing, and that was enough to make hell nervous. Because the most dangerous person in the world is the one who has nothing left to lose, except their fear. Part 4, Inheritance in Obscurity. A back bedroom in a friend's small home just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Mismatched furniture, faded wallpaper, one window overlooking a back alley. Late evening. The room is quiet, almost too quiet. The room wasn't mine. The bed creaked. The walls sighed. Even the closet seemed to whisper, this is temporary. But temporary had lasted 4 months. 4 months of tucking dreams beneath borrowed blankets. 4 months of rehearsing answers to, so what are you doing these days? I didn't know how to say. I'm being held in a place I didn't choose, for a purpose I don't yet understand. Obscurity has a scent. It smells like borrowed shampoo and microwave leftovers. It smells like waiting rooms and swallowed pride. But that night, as I sat on the edge of that twin bed, my phone buzzed with a Bible app alert. Just one verse. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. I read it, then reread it. And I laughed, out loud. Royalty? Here? In a room I didn't own. On a pillow that wasn't mine. And yet, my spirit stood taller. Because I realized something. God doesn't crown you after the spotlight. He marks you in the shadows. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. Obscurity wasn't exile. It was oil, crushing what didn't belong, breaking what couldn't come with me. I remembered David, forgotten by his father, anointed in the presence of people who didn't even call him by name, and yet he was still chosen. So maybe this dusty back room was my Bethlehem, and this borrowed silence, my coronation. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. That night I prayed with no background music, no oil, no laying of hands, just a whispered confession. God, I still believe you didn't forget me. And for the first time in weeks, I slept like royalty, not because of the room, but because of who sat with me in it. Part 5. The Sacred Economy of Energy. A cozy downtown coffee shop in Nashville. Morning sun spills through the windows. The protagonist sits across from a polished interviewer in a blazer, resume in hand. The air smells of espresso and quiet rejection. The barista called my name, but I barely heard it. I sat at that interview table, nodding, smiling, shrinking, doing everything right, speaking fluent professionalism while my spirit whispered, "This is not your table." The interviewer glanced at my resume, eyes skimming like I was an afterthought. She smiled, the way people smile when they've already decided no. And in her next words, I heard it. "We're looking for someone a little more aligned with our brand." Translation, not you. I thanked her for her time. I gathered my bag. I walked toward the exit, but inside, Something sacred snapped, not from offense, but from awakening, because in that moment I saw it. I'd been hustling for tables God never told me to sit at, lowering my light just to be liked, exchanging my essence for a paycheck that wouldn't pay peace. And heaven whispered, "Your energy is your economy now, spend it wisely. Your frequency is shifting, and the world will respond." I sat back down with my coffee, not to cry, but to breathe. That's when he appeared, an elderly man in a corduroy jacket, soft eyes and silver hair. He sat beside me without asking, and without introduction, he said, "You don't belong in their system. You were sent to build your own." I blinked. "Excuse me." He smiled. He sipped his tea and added, "You carry something they can't quantify. That's why they won't hire you." Then he stood and walked away. I never saw him again, but his words unlocked something in me. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, I stopped applying for things that didn't feel like home. I stopped auditioning for belonging in rooms where my spirit felt unseen. Stopped negotiating with spaces that required my exhaustion as an entrance fee. Instead, I started guarding my energy like currency, because it was. The people I poured into, the places I pursued, the thoughts I entertained, all of it was either robbing me or rebuilding me. That was the shift. I no longer asked, "What will this pay?" I asked, "Will this cost me my peace?" And suddenly, the world started treating me differently. Not because it changed, but because I did. Part 6. Peace is the new flex. A Target parking lot in Birmingham, Alabama. The protagonist sits in her car, engine running but parked. Her hands rest on the steering wheel. She stares straight ahead. A deep breath. Then another. Late afternoon sun filters through the windshield. I didn't go in right away. I just sat there. Engine humming. Soul stilling. Outside, the world was loud. Grocery carts clanging, kids screaming, life rushing. But inside the car, there was stillness, but silence. Stillness, a peace I hadn't earned, hadn't paid for, thus didn't manufacture. It just arrived. Not because life got easier, but because I finally stopped trying to wrestle it into shape. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't tired from the work. I was tired from the war I was waging inside myself. The war of comparison. The war of trying to prove I was worthy. The war of constantly preparing for the worst. But peace whispered, "Let me be the preparation." God's favor speaks louder than any fear. A woman walked by my car, 2 kids in tow, snacks spilling from a plastic bag. She looked like I used to feel, tired, stretched thin, invisible. Our eyes met for 1 second. She didn't smile, but I did. And for a flicker of a moment, something passed between us. Not words, not pity, is recognition. I saw her, because I had been her, but I was not her anymore. Not because I made more money, not because my life was perfect, but because I had made peace my priority, not my prize. I finally turned off the engine, stepped out, walked in, not as someone trying to hide her weariness, but as someone who had found rest. In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and trust shall be your strength. I didn't shop long, didn't overthink, didn't flinch when I reached for what I needed. That was the real miracle. I didn't feel guilty for feeling okay, because peace isn't just the absence of chaos. It's the presence of God. And in that parking lot, in that moment, I realized peace is the new flex. Not proving, not performing, not hustling, just being, rooted, whole, and in a world addicted to noise, that is the loudest testimony of all. Part 7. Overflow doesn't knock, it breaks in. The protagonist's bedroom in the late evening. dim lamplight, soft worship music playing in the background. She sits on the edge of her bed, scrolling through unread emails. One subject line catches her eye. "We'd like to reconnect. Position opening." I wasn't looking for it. Not anymore. My heart stopped chasing, stopped refreshing the job boards, stopped pretending I needed another rejection to prove I was being faithful. I was just living. And then it happened. A name I hadn't seen in months. A recruiter I had interviewed with nearly a year ago. An opportunity I thought had passed me by. "We'd like to reconnect. There's been a shift on our end." A shift. That word struck me deep, because I had shifted too. No longer desperate. No longer performing. No longer trying to prove I was enough. Now, I was just ready. Not because I fought harder, but because I had surrendered deeper. You didn't miss your moment waited for you. I stared at the email, then closed my eyes. "God, is this you?" And the answer didn't come in a lightning bolt. It came in the stillness I had learned to trust. That peace, that holy confirmation that no longer required proof. It washed over me like oil, because I realized overflow doesn't wait at the door. It doesn't knock politely. It breaks in. It rearranges schedules. It revisits old rooms with new favor. It shows up wearing clothes you no longer beg for, because now you walk clothed in alignment. "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." I replied to the email, not with anxiety, but with assurance, because I knew this wasn't just about income. It was about timing, heaven's timing. This wasn't just a job. It was a signal, a message from the courts of glory. You passed the test. Now receive the table. And this time, I didn't second guess. I didn't ask, "Am I ready?" Didn't wonder, "Why now?" Because when favor breaks in, you don't analyze it. You agree with it. And overflow doesn't just pay in dollars. It pays in peace. Part 8. You are not being ignored. You're being introduced. A mentorship dinner at a high-end restaurant in Dallas. Candlelight, soft jazz, laughter, and clinking glasses. The protagonist is seated at the head of the table. Not as a guest, but as the honoree. The last time I saw faces like these, I was invisible to them, smiling, polite, slightly overlooked. Always present, but never pivotal. But tonight, something had changed. Not just the setting, not just the clothes, but me. The hostess led me to a table where my name was printed on a gold-rimmed card. I sat not as an imposter trying to fit in, but as a daughter of destiny walking into a room that had waited for her arrival. As the wine poured and the laughter rose, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Someone from a former season. Someone who never saw me. Their eyes met mine, and you could see the hesitation, the recognition, the recalibration. Not because I announced anything, but because favor speaks louder than introductions. Favor rather than fast. It's faithful. My mentor leaned toward me mid-conversation and said with a smile, "They're not just seeing you now. They're seeing who you've always been." I blinked back tears, because the girl who once begged God to be noticed was now being introduced by heaven in circles she never imagined entering. And not because she earned it, but because she endured it. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't flex. This was recompense. The kind that only comes when you've stopped explaining yourself and started embodying the promise. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. I didn't need to be the loudest voice at the table. I had become the evidence of what grace can do, of what obedience births, of how heaven elevates the ones who stay faithful in the shadows. And as I looked around that table, full of opportunities, affirmations, and open doors, I whispered to my soul, "You weren't ignored. You were being introduced." And now that the time is right, they can't help but recognize you. Because when God's favor shows up, it doesn't ask permission. It announces you. Part 9. The royal blueprint was in you all along. A quiet, sun-drenched apartment in Charlotte. Morning light filters through gauzy curtains. The protagonist sits on the floor beside unpacked boxes, holding an old journal. A cup of coffee rests on the windowsill beside a small plant beginning to bloom. There was no ribbon cutting, no spotlight, no choir singing, "You made it," just silence and sunlight. I sat on the floor of my new apartment. First morning, first sip of coffee, first time I'd ever felt settled. I hadn't decorated much yet. The furniture was modest, but peace filled the room like incense. There was no drama, no struggle, no chase, just stillness, and a whisper from the spirit. You're not waiting for abundance anymore. You are abundance. I reached for the journal I hadn't opened in years. The pages were worn, stained with old tears, and quiet hopes I once thought were too big to speak out loud. There, scribbled in shaky handwriting, was a line I'd written at my lowest. God, if you ever lift me out of this season, please don't let me forget who I was in it. I smiled, because I hadn't forgotten, but I also wasn't her anymore. You are now living the life you once only survived to imagine. This wasn't luck. This was legacy. This was the harvest of every silent yes. Every morning I got up while grieving. Every night I whispered prayers when no one saw. And now, here I was, in the very reality I had once only dared to believe in private. Not because I forced it, but because I aligned with it. Because God doesn't hand you overflow when you're hustling to be worthy of it. He releases it when you remember you already were. The royal blueprint was in me all along. Not printed on a resume, not stamped by society, etched in my soul. From the moment he whispered me into existence, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I closed the journal. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you, God, for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on me." And heaven whispered back, "You didn't just arrive, you returned to the version of you I always saw." Part 10. You are the evidence. A small but elegant conference hall in Houston, Texas. Rows of chairs filled. A microphone sits on a wooden podium. The protagonist stands at the front, moments before speaking. In the front row, a young girl, her daughter, watches with wide, teary eyes. The mic hummed softly as I approached. I could feel their eyes, some skeptical, others searching, but I didn't flinch. Not because I was fearless, but because I was full of peace, full of purpose, full of something I used to chase but now carried. I looked out over the crowd. They weren't strangers. They were mirrors. Women who looked like I used to. Men holding on by a thread of hope. Spirits craving confirmation. And there, on the front row, my daughter, eyes glistening, heart open, learning by watching me what God can do with someone who refuses to die in the wilderness. I didn't start with a title, or a joke, or a list of credentials. I started with truth. I am not standing here because I've figured it out. I'm standing here because I finally stopped fighting what I was born to carry. You're no longer chasing. You've become the evidence. I shared the losses, the nights I almost gave up, the mornings I begged for signs, the seasons where silence was my only friend. But then, the shift, the alignment, the peace that didn't come through effort, but through surrender. And one by one, I watched the room lean in, not to me, but to the God in me. I saw shoulders relax, eyes close in reverence. People who had walked in with fear now bathing in hope. This wasn't a talk. It was a transfer of faith, of favor, of evidence. Because here's the secret. You don't have to shout you've been chosen. Heaven will confirm it through your becoming. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her. Afterward, a woman came up to me, tears streaming. She didn't ask for advice. She simply whispered, "You just told my story." And that's when I knew I wasn't called to impress. I was called to reflect, not wealth, not success, but the grace of a God who lifts the overlooked, who crowns the rejected, who calls the broken blessed. That night, as I walked to my car with my daughter's hand in mine, she asked, "Mum, how did it all happen?" And I smiled and said, "I stopped surviving. I surrendered, and God did the rest." Because, chosen one, when the overflow finds you, you don't have to prove a thing. You are the proof. You were never waiting on the overflow, you were becoming it. There's a moment when you stop asking if you're worthy of the blessing and start walking like someone who already carries it. At that moment is now. You've crossed the wilderness. You've endured the quiet rejection, the private breakdowns, the invisible sacrifices. You've sat in borrowed rooms, clung to whispered scriptures, and worshipped when there was no sign of rescue. And now, heaven is confirming what hell tried to make you doubt. You are no longer the one begging for entry. You are the one building the room. This isn't just a new chapter. It's a new language. You speak peace now. You radiate worth. You walk in a kind of stillness that makes even storms adjust their tone. The girl who settled for crumbs? Gone. The man who called himself not enough? Buried. In their place stands a royal, radiant, redeemed soul, no longer chasing overflow, but embodying it. You are not waiting for abundance anymore. You are abundance. You are the evidence that grace doesn't miss. That divine timing is never late. That healing is not hype, it's holy. And when God restores, he doesn't send scraps, he sends waves. So if this story found you, if something inside you whispered, "This is me," don't scroll past. Comment below, "I receive this overflow." Let heaven see your yes. Let your faith go on record. If this story stirred something in you, share it with someone you love. Let your breakthrough become someone else's beginning. And if you believe messages like this matter, if you want this kind of storytelling to keep flowing, support the journey. Let God lead you. May peace become your default. May favor chase you down. May your life overflow, not just with blessings, but with evidence, because you are not just blessed, you are becoming a blessing.